Welcome back to Everyday Ancestral. I'm your host, James Berry. Robyn Jackson is a mom to 3 children, a rancher's wife, a homesteader, and a milkmaid. She's been milking a cow and making cheese in her kitchen since 2014, teaching others through her business, Cheese from Scratch, since 2021. So since launching her business, Robyn has taught thousands of students and is passionate about not only teaching the skill of cheese making, but educating people about cheese as a traditional form of fermentation and preservation of milk. Incredible way to control your ingredients. Thank you again and enjoy this episode with Robyn Jackson. Robyn, it is such a pleasure to talk to you. I know we met briefly at the Modern Homesteading Conference, but I've never actually gotten to work with you with your cheese. So this is a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
So I want to understand, I learned on the internet that Brie and Colby are your favorite cheeses to make. So what is it about it that make those your favorite? Texture? Is it flavor? Because honestly, I want to be straight with everyone listening and you specifically. I'm not a cheese guy. Like I actually don't crave cheese. I don't gravitate toward it, but I'm fascinated that so many people do. And I'm hoping that I leave this interview learning a little bit more about what it is that is so attractive to everyone other than, of course, the fat and the texture and all that. But the flavor is so unique for so many different cheeses. And yeah, so I'll let you talk now.
I wonder if you just haven't found the right cheese yet.
Oh, well, that's a really good point, actually.
Yeah, maybe.
That's a
Maybe
really
you
good
haven't
point.
found
I
yours.
mean, I do like harder cheeses and I like manchego. I guess if I dig a little deeper, there are some cheeses. I like Parmesan, but
Yeah.
I tend to gravitate towards harder cheeses. So I guess that goes back to the question of what is it about Brie and Colby that make those your favorite cheeses?
So they're kind of they're such different cheeses, which is cool. But Colby is definitely I love making it because it's the cheese that my family loves. So my husband Zach is originally from Wisconsin, and so he loves Colby cheese. He loves mozzarella string cheese. He loves all those kind of like just traditional Wisconsin cheese state cheeses. And then my kids also just really love Colby. They like that it's kind of mild and it sort of tastes like the cheese that you get from the grocery store, just like I don't want to compare it to Kraft, but like it tastes like something that you would just buy at the grocery store and it tastes normal to them. So they like that. And then I love making brie. So brie is like my favorite cheese ever to make. It's so fun to make. And then I love eating it myself. It's my favorite cheese probably to eat.
And when you think about cheeses and what you've found from just your hours of working with cheese, and then of course you're teaching so many people, what do you think is the kind of attracting point? What's the linchpin around cheese for people? Do you find its texture?
I think it's probably, yeah, texture, the fat. It just is like so satiating to your body. Like when you have a piece of cheese, it just is like, I needed that. That was good. And so I think that's probably it for me as like a homesteader or rancher kind of thing. It's a way to preserve my milk. So I really love it in that sense that it's a way that I can take something that's highly perishable and turn it into something that is going to be shelf stable almost, or not quite shelf stable, but cold room stable basically, and is going to last me for years.
Yeah, I think that's really the key, right? I mean, this is a preservation technique. You're getting really good fat, as you mentioned. You're getting good protein, and then of course lots of flavor. But you began cheese making in what, like 2014? Is that right?
Yeah, 2014, yeah. 10
And
years
what
ago
is
now.
it? 10 years. Wow. Okay. So what is it that brought you? What were you doing before, and then what brought you to cheese making?
Zach and my husband and we've had our cattle ranch for 12 years now, I guess it is. And so, as I said before, my husband's originally from Wisconsin. We live in Canada now. And so he moved with his family to Canada. I am from Canada. And we met and we married, and both of our families had cattle ranches. So it was kind of just a natural we wanted to be cattle ranchers too, so we bought a cattle ranch. But ever since I met Zach, he's always wanted to have a dairy cow again. And like he just always talked about it. And I never grew up with a dairy cow. I didn't know why he was so excited about them. But then one day he just brought one home and he's like, "Can you make me some cheese?" And at that point, I'd been growing a garden and doing a little bit of fermenting and stuff like that. So it wasn't like this preposterous idea. So I was kind of excited to do it, and I just started turning our milk into cheese from that cow, and the rest is history.
Well, now what was I mean, you had never made cheese before, right? So what's the learning curve? Like what was your resource for learning and how did it grow from there? I mean, did you like it enough to say, "Oh, this is fun. Let me keep exploring," or was it more just like, "Oh, I want to make my husband happy. He loves this. I'm going to find my way," you know?
I think kinda like a little bit, um a little bit of both, a little bit of both. So I had already
Oh,
been
okay.
making yogurt from store-bought milk, so I was already really interested in food preservation and, making more things from scratch and stuff, so that kind of got me excited about it. I had a book that I, just, read through. It was 200 Easy Homemade Cheese Recipes by, Deborah Amron Boyce, who's also Canadian, actually. So I had that book, and I just read through it. It was like my Bible for cheese making, and there was a lot of trial and error. So I would say the learning curve was very, very steep, but it was also very exciting because even though it was steep and I had a lot of failures, I also had some successes along the way early on. And so that kind of just drove me to just keep learning and keep wanting to improve, I would say.
That's lovely. And then that you eventually founded Cheese from Scratch, which is your educational platform. How long did it take for you to take this interest and turn it into really like a career, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, so that was about 3 years. I think it was 3 years ago that I started Cheese from Scratch. So I'd been making cheese for about 7 years, at that point, and I was kind of looking for a way that I could stay home more on the ranch. I was, working in town full time at that point, so I was looking for a way that I could stay home on the ranch, be with my kids more, and so I was like, "I've got this really cool hobby of cheese making. Lots of people are asking me, like, 'How is cheese made? Can you teach me?' kinda thing." So I decided to just kind of dive into it and, yeah, start teaching other people online how to make cheese, and, yeah, Cheese from Scratch kinda took off. I think it was a good time because, there was a lot of people just looking to stay home more, make their own food from scratch more, just like post-COVID, basically. So I think it was a good time to kind of start a business like that, but, it's been really fun. I've taught a lot of people how to make cheese, and, it's so exciting to see that people are starting to enjoy this really age-old skill of cheese making.
yeah, I mean, and I've heard so many good things about your specific way of teaching. Now, you're a bit unique though, right, in how you teach, because don't you emphasize traditional cheese making?
Yeah, I'm a, learner in traditional cheesemaking myself right now. A lot of people are learning kind of at the same level as I am for traditional cheesemaking just because it's almost been lost. Like, in the last 100 years, cheesemaking has changed so drastically. Like, it is almost unrecognizable to how cheese has been made for thousands of years. The last 100 years have just changed it all. So we're trying to get back to that how cheese was made before, pasteurization and sterilization and freeze dried cultures that you're buying from the cheese supply store. So we're trying to relearn things that we've kind of forgotten almost. So I would say I'm definitely a learner in that area, just like everybody else, but it's an exciting sort of journey that we're all on, trying to sort of reclaim natural cheese making.
Well, let's talk about that. So, yeah, so the pasteurization of milk. I mean, how do you know the history of like how did that affect cheese making and what had to change or did anything?
Yeah, I think pasteurization just um, it sort of almost set like a precedent for like sterilization and everything like that. It changed everything is what what the answer to that is. So what I know a little I know enough of the history of pasteurization. So it kind of at the time when pasteurization came in, it was a good solution to a problem that was happening. A lot of people were getting sick from industrialized milk. So it was industrial revolution, everything had changed in the way that we were raising our animals and the way that milk was being transported. And so pasteurization was sort of like this band-aid solution that came in and, okay, if we heat our milk up to a high temperature, it's going to kill all of the bacteria and people aren't going to get sick. Because in milk, that is not handled appropriately. There is good bacteria, but there is also bad bacteria. And some of these bad bacteria were making people sick. And so pasteurization was that band-aid solution that fixed it and made it so that that people weren't going to basically die. But then with that came all sorts of other things where now that you have changed the basic structure of milk, now you have to do different things in your cheese making to make it successful. And so it was sort of like this thing that just like domino affected everything in the cheese making world.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too because in many ways, pasteurization just kind of gave permission for really poor, inhumane, poor dairy cow, I don't know, conditions or raising of dairy cows and dealing with milk, right? I mean, it's almost like here we have this technique, so doesn't matter as much about all the other things because we'll just kill whatever you create or
Yeah,
co-create,
exactly.
right?
Like there's an acceptable amount when milk is like picked up from the dairy farm, there's an acceptable amount of somatic cell count that is in that milk. Like it's acceptable for that milk to be dirty or contaminated or have these bad bacteria in it because you're just going to pasteurize it and kill it off anyways. So yeah, it's given permission for bad milk handling practices, bad animal husbandry, the breeding of animals to be used just for production rather than, just like healing the land and looking after the animals. So, yeah, that's my opinion.
And right. I mean, and you work with both raw and store-bought milk. So what do you see? Like, what's the difference in the cheese making? Are you sort of restricted on what cheeses you can use or make with raw versus store-bought milk? Maybe just talk about your experience with both in terms of cheese making.
Yeah. So I would consider myself mostly a raw milk cheesemaker because I have dairy animals on my farm. That's my kind of expertise. I'm very like pro raw milk, pro having your own fresh dairy source, pro being able to kind of access that. But I know that that's not going to be something that everybody can access just because the state of how everything is. So I do teach pasteurized milk as well. Pasteurized milk can be turned into cheese, but there's different things that you have to do to get that milk to turn into cheese. So just as an example, raw milk, it comes out of a cow's udder. And it's perfectly designed to be turned into cheese. That little calf that is going to drink that milk relies on this ability of milk to turn to cheese to actually be able to survive. So that milk comes out of the udder, it's nice and warm, it goes into the little calf's stomach where it's also warm, it's acidic in there, there are enzymes, we know these enzymes called rennet, and all of these things kind of combine to cause that milk to go from its liquid form to its solid form or its cheese form. And so when we're making cheese with raw milk, or fresh raw milk that's, almost straight from the udder, we are able to sort of mimic this natural process, and that helps us to make better cheese. Whereas if you are making cheese from pasteurized milk that's at the grocery store, not only is that milk cooled, so you have to warm it back up to the correct temperature that it kind of comes out of the udder. And during the pasteurization process, the composition of that milk has been damaged. So there's not, these natural, good, beneficial bacteria in it. There's the mineral components of it has been damaged. So you have to add something back in called calcium chloride to make that milk actually coagulate. So all these things, or not all these things, a few of these things have to be done when you are dealing with pasteurized milk, where it's just so much easier if you're dealing with raw milk, fresh raw milk, should say.
Oh man, that's so interesting. And so when you're working with the raw milk, you're literally taking the warm milk and making cheese straight away.
Yeah, you're just like, I bring it in from the barn, strain it so that it's nice and clean. There's no barn debris or anything, and put it into the cheese pot if I have time that day. I'm not opposed to putting it into the fridge, but I try not to make cheese with milk that is older than, 2 to 3 days because that's just, you're going to have more problems with that. So I am kind of like, as much as I'm pro raw milk, I'm pro fresh raw milk. And if you don't have access to that fresh raw milk, then you should probably be considering dealing with pasteurized milk, but it should be like low temperature pasteurization. It shouldn't be ultra pasteurized. So ultra pasteurized milk cannot be turned into cheese, which is interesting and also concerning.
Wait, say that again. The high temperature milk cannot?
Yeah, so ultra pasteurized milk, which a lot of milk actually I've found in the States is ultra pasteurized. In Canada,
Yeah,
not so much. Most of it's just low temperature pasteurization, but ultra pasteurized milk can't be turned into cheese. So,
that's so interesting because I mean, I think you're right. I think in the US, I've never seen low temp. I mean, it's very rare. Maybe I have once or twice, but it's usually pasteurized.
yeah, it's concerning because that won't turn to cheese. And so if you are in the States or you're in an area where raw milk's not legal, and you're having to rely on the grocery stores, it's beneficial to make those connections in your community, even if you're having to buy pasteurized milk from small farms around you, at least that's probably going to be low temperature pasteurized. If milk can still creamline, that's also a good indication that it's a little bit less processed. So milk that can still creamline. So if you're listening to this and you don't really know what real milk is, so real milk, the cream rises to the top of raw cow's milk, and you are able to kind of scoop it off and make your butter or whatever. So if you are able to find creamline milk, it's probably going to be less processed. It hasn't gone through the homogenization process.
That's a really great tip. And so, what can you do with pasteurized milk? Can you make yogurt? I mean, is there
Yeah, I think
anything
you
you
can
can
make
do with it?
yogurt. Yeah, I
Okay.
actually I'm 98% sure you can make yogurt. I've never dealt with it. I've never used it before. But yeah, I just know that you can't get it to coagulate with that enzyme rennet that I talked about. So, and rennet is something that we add during the cheese making process to cause quick coagulation. And ultra pasteurized, even if you add that calcium chloride that I talked about, it won't coagulate.
Have you messed around with vegetable rennet versus animal? And if
Yeah.
so, any difference in your opinion?
I prefer animal rennet just because I am trying to mimic that natural process in my cheese making. I'm the more natural I can go, basically, the better my cheeses are. Vegetable rennet does make good cheese, but it causes bitterness in cheeses that are aged over like 4 months. So it's better for fresh cheeses. So there's basically, a couple different types of rennet that you can get. You can get animal rennet, which is harvested from young animals. So usually they're about 2 weeks when they're harvested. So that comes with its own sort of ethical things for people. And then vegetable rennet is usually coming from like figs and cardoons and thistle, I think, are some of the sources of that. And so it's like maybe feels a little bit more ethical, but you also need to harvest a lot more of those vegetables to be able to make a small amount of rennet, whereas a animal has enough rennet in its stomach to turn all of its mother's milk into cheese throughout her entire lactation. So there's a lot more rennet actually coming from those animal stomachs. And then you also have rennet that is made in labs. So it's called FCP rennet, which is it's not a genetically modified organism itself, but it's created using a genetically modified process.
And so it's neither animal nor vegetable? I mean, what is it?
It's it's actually exactly, if you looked under a microscope, it looks exactly like the animal rennet. So it's called an enzyme called chymosin. So that's the enzyme that is in the lining of young calves' stomachs. But this chymosin is produced, I believe, using like a bacteria or a fungus. So they genetically modify that organism to produce this enzyme, and then they kill that organism off, and then they're left with this enzyme. So it isn't really listed as a genetically modified product, but a genetically modified organism, because an enzyme can't be an organism, but it is created using a genetically modified process.
And did you say you have worked with it or you have not?
I haven't, but it's apparently does the exact same thing as animal rennet. So if that's what you have available to you, it does. It doesn't cause bitterness in cheeses that are aged over the 4 months. People that are vegetarian, I believe, can use it because it's not actually an animal product. So yeah, so those are kind of the benefits of it, I guess. And it, yeah,
Interesting.
does do the exact same thing as the animal version.
Can you talk a little bit about the aging? I mean, just assuming, no one knows anything. Like, can you just
Mhm.
talk about why and how the aging affects the cheese? Because you already are mentioning that it sounds like the longer it's aged, the less bitter it is. Is that accurate?
So just for vegetable rennet, it
Oh,
can
okay.
cause bitterness in cheeses that are aged over 4 months. So they say. I don't usually really use vegetable rennet that much, but that's like kind of a common knowledge thing in the cheese making world that that does cause that. So different cheeses are going to age in different ways, and you're going to use different techniques to age different cheeses. And kind of it all starts in the cheese pot. It starts at the very beginning of your cheese making, not only with what culture, bacterial culture, so just like if you're sort of making any other fermented product, you're adding a bacterial culture into your milk. So different cultures are going to help you make different cheeses. Or not. That's a whole nother conversation.
Oh,
And then
that's
also,
my next question. So we'll get there.
all right, so that's good. And then the way that you handle your milk in the cheese pot. So, how much moisture you're releasing, how much you're allowing it to ferment, what heats you're bringing it to. All of those things are going to define aging, and then the actual aging process itself. And it's such a vast conversation basically about all the different ways that you can age cheese. And maybe you can make one cheese the exact same as you make another cheese, but you can age it differently. It will become an entirely different cheese. um, so yeah, just so much to it, really.
So let's talk about the bacteria used, and then also obviously it's tied to the environment as well, right? So what what are the different bacterias? Where do they come from? I know obviously some are coming from the air, but maybe just talk about that process, and then in turn, um, the environment that then you're allowing the cheese to cure or curd. How, how does that affect
Yeah.
the
So,
product?
just like with any other, like cheese making is really a lot like other fermentation methods. So, same thing if you are using vegetable fermentation, you're relying on a type of bacteria called lactic bacteria. So, that's this huge head category of bacteria that like to feed on sugar. So, lactic bacteria were actually named for their love of milk because lactic bacteria live in raw milk and they like to feed on the sugar, which is the lactose in the milk. And as they feed on that sugar, they ferment it into lactic acid and cause that fermentation. So that's sort of the first process of fermentation in cheese making. And there is multiple different stages of fermentation, but all cheeses are starting with this addition of lactic bacteria, and it's fermenting and acidifying the milk. So there's different types of lactic bacteria. You can get warm-loving ones that are referred to as thermophilic, and so they're going to be used for cheeses where you're cooking the curds to a higher heat. And then there's the mesophilic ones, which are where you're cooking the curds to a lower heat. Or you can, just like with a sourdough starter, where you can bake all sorts of different types of bread with one starter, you can make your own cheese making starter. I refer to it, or a lot of people refer to it as clabber culture. So it's a raw milk starter culture, and it kind of harnesses the power of the raw milk. So instead of adding a freeze dried starter culture that you're going to buy on the store that's just one specific strain, these homemade cultures, they have a whole ecology of different bacterias within them. And these bacterias, you can kind of isolate the ones that you want depending on your cheese making technique. So if you want those thermophilic bacterias, you're going to be heating your milk to a higher heat during the cheese making process, and that's going to encourage those ones to thrive. Whereas if you want your mesophilic, the lower temperature ones, you're going to be heating it to a lower heat kind of thing. So that's something that is a little bit more advanced, but it's super exciting because we haven't really been talking about this for very long. There's this guy named David Asher. He's written a couple books now. And so he's sort of spearheading all of this natural cheese making thing, and we're all sort of just learning from him. But I've been making clabber for a couple of years now, and it was almost mind blowing because before that I was using that freeze dried cultures, and I just kind of was like, oh, you could not make your own starter cultures at home. But like, yeah, I've been having really, really good results using this clabber culture, which is very exciting.
That is really exciting. So really, it's truly like a homemade cheese. Like every aspect of it is coming from your farm in your case,
Yeah,
but
exactly,
you
other
don't
than the
have to
rennet.
outsource anything. What was that last thing you just said?
Just other than the rennet, everything else is coming from, coming from our own farm.
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, so before we get into the actual making of the cheese, I imagine there's probably some people listening that are like never going to make cheese. So, can we just support them in what should they be looking for when they go to the grocery store? You know, what is, and let's set the criteria as most nutritious, maybe most flavorful. And I know that's going to vary hugely, but maybe just pick some of your favorites of and what criteria people should be looking for. Should it be, aged a certain, a minimum of a certain amount of months, and anything that's going to help the kind of the store buyer, the cheese store buyer.
Yeah, I think like primary first thing on my list would be local. Local, that's going to be made well, if it's probably made using freeze-dried bacteria, but it's going to, be supporting your community. If it is made with natural cultures, which I don't think there is any cheese making plants in North America at this moment that are making using cheese making cultures, but are natural cheese making cultures, but it would have the microbes from your community, your area. Um, so that's kind of my first on the list is local. My second on the list is because I am a mom to three kids, is something that your kids are going to eat. It's a big transition for families to kind of move away from those big processed brand cheeses. So kind of going
The ones
for
that you can't really call cheese, those ones.
yeah, exactly. The ones where so when you look on a cheese making, actually, this is what you should do. When you look on a cheese making or on the ingredient list of your cheese, you want there to be four ingredients. If there's more than four ingredients, other than maybe if there's like spices or anything like that, you don't want to buy it. So the four ingredients that you are looking for on your cheese making label is your milk, your bacterial culture, your rennet, and your salt. So those are the only four ingredients that need to be in in um, in cheese. Anything else is just extra or has been put there unnaturally. So rennet sometimes, yeah, it will probably be listed as rennet or it'll be listed as enzymes, and bacteria would be listed as lactic bacteria, live bacteria, probiotic, something like that.
Do you think organic, conventional, do you focus on those when someone's buying cheese, or do you think that with the process it doesn't matter?
I think it does matter. I think that, yeah, cows that are fed on grass, or well, that's another conversation, but like, cows that are raised in the way that you want to buy your milk, for example, are going to give you better, more nutritious cheese, I should say. So, yeah, the grass-fed cow, it's a whole thing, but milk cows, I don't 100% believe that we have bred them to a point where they actually can't sustain their health on grass alone. So, as long as they're healthy grass-fed cows, then I promote grass-fed cheese.
And then from there, what, organic, and then
Yeah,
and then
organic, any ways that you're kind of looking to buy your regular foods anyways, are good practices to bring in there. But yeah, I would say the big one is local, then making sure it only has those four ingredients, making sure you pick out one that your family loves. And yeah.
and for anyone that's sensitive to lactose, is aged cheese gonna have less of it? Is there a truth to that? That, the more aged the cheese or the harder the cheese, the more possibility they won't have issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So the lactic bacteria that we talked about, they feed on the lactose and they ferment it into lactic acid. So if a cheese is aged longer, for example, a Parmesan, there's probably very little lactose actually in it. So if you are truly lactose intolerant, you can probably consume those cheeses.
And what would so Parmesan is one, what's some others that would be an example?
Parmesan, like long aged cheddar, Colby, what other ones?
Is there
Um,
like a specific age with the cheddar, like that it should be? Do you happen to know that?
I don't know exactly, but I would say any cheese that was aged probably over like 3 months. Honestly, by the time that they get to where they're being wrapped and stored, there's very little lactose left into those cheese anyways. But if you really are that, I don't know if you're truly, truly lactose intolerant or lactose allergy, you shouldn't consume cheese, but because there will be traces of lactose in there. But if you're just intolerant of it, probably, you could probably even consume fresher aged cheeses.
You have been working with, you said making cheese for now for 10 years. Have Has there ever been like a kind of concern or fear that what if I become lactose intolerant, from just consuming it so much? Because there is kind of like a possibility when someone does something so much that they can become sensitive to it. Is there that been a fear, or has that ever come up for you or your family?
I don't think it's ever been a fear that I've thought about too much. I actually think that a lot of people that presume that they're lactose intolerant, this is again just my opinion, but I think a lot of people that presume that they're lactose intolerant might actually be sensitive to the proteins in milk. So there's different proteins that cows can have in their, or different types of proteins that cows can have in their milk. So I think a lot of times that's maybe where that's kind of stemming from. I feel like if you're fermenting milk, it's just way more easier to digest. And so I actually don't drink a lot of just raw milk that is fresh. I Most of the dairy products that I'm consuming have been fermented, and I feel like that really helps with. Yeah, I haven't ever worried about it, but I think that really helps with digestion.
Yeah, in a sense, it's almost like you're saying, like if you just kind of properly prepare it, you use the cleanest and most natural ingredients that life kind of will protect you in a sense. Is that
Yeah.
kind of your
Yeah,
sense?
exactly, and it's just making it so much more, it's like pre-digesting it a little bit for your body, or a lot bit. It's pre-digesting it for your body so that it's more bioavailable for you and that you can actually take those nutrients and use them.
Okay. So let's just say now someone's like, okay, I'm ready. I want to make my first, fermented or cheese dairy product. Where should they start? Should they start with yogurt? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think yogurt is a great starting point. Kefir is also a really great starting point. If you have access to fresh raw milk, that clabber that I talked about is also like probably my number one starting point. If you have a dairy animal, you have to be keeping a clabber culture because it's such an amazing product. It's a culture, but it's also a dairy product in itself. We eat a lot of clabber in our house. So probably if you don't have a dairy animal or anything though, if you can get access to some kefir grains, they're going to be a really easy dairy product for you to kind of keep just like a sourdough starter, feeding every day, getting this product every day that you're able to consume. And if you can't get your hands on any kefir grains, that yogurt is also a really great starting point.
Can we actually kind of give people a basic recipe for you choose either yogurt or clabber?
Yeah, I'll give a recipe for yogurt because it's probably just kind of the one that is most available to most people. But basically, what you're doing when you make yogurt is you're pasteurizing the milk, which seems funny, but don't worry, we're going to add bacteria back into it. So you heat it up to a high temperature, so usually about 190 degrees Fahrenheit. And this pasteurizes out any of the raw milk bacterias, or if it's already pasteurized milk, it pasteurizes out any other bacterias that have environmentally been introduced. And it also changes the composition of the milk so that you're going to get a creamier texture. So it's also important for that creamy texture of yogurt to heat up to that high temperature. And then what you're going to do is you're going to lower the temperature back down to a good fermenting temperature. So usually this is about 110 degrees for yogurt culture because it's, like I said before, that thermophilic warm loving bacteria. So you're going to cool it down to 110, then you're going to add in your starter culture. And so if you don't have any yogurt culture, you can just use yogurt from the grocery store. Just make sure that it has live bacteria in it. So it hasn't been pasteurized after the making of it because it's crazy. Sometimes yogurt is made commercially and then they pasteurize the yogurt out, basically kill all the good stuff. So just plain yogurt from the grocery store that still has live bacteria in it. You can add that in. You're going to add a quarter cup of yogurt in to per gallon of milk used. And then you're going to just stir it up and let it sit in a warm place for about 8 hours. And then it should be nice, beautifully thick yogurt.
And you're only putting it in the refrigerator when it's kind of at the flavor or the culture that you want it to be, right? So in many ways, I know, like, for example, eggs don't always have to be kept in, particularly if you're getting them from a fresh farm, they don't have to be kept in the refrigerator. Is that true with some cheeses as well?
To a point. So cheese making is the decomposition of milk. So it's like fancy composting. So yes, maybe your milk would, or your cheeses that you're making would be safe to consume, even though you left them at room temperature. But they're going to continue to evolve. They're going to continue to ferment, and because they're at a warmer temperature, that might not be a desirable ferment. It might not taste good. So cooler temperatures are good for cheeses to be stored in, just not as cool as your regular refrigerator. So, like fresh dairy products like yogurt and stuff, they can be stored in your regular refrigerator. In fact, I recommend it. But for actual cheeses, usually they're stored between about 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So a lot of people store them in like their cellars or their attics. I have a special refrigerator that I have a thermostat hooked up to that I just keep it at that temperature. But
Oh, similar to how people, keep wine or something like that.
yeah, exactly. Wine fridges, like lots of people use wine fridges as cheese caves.
Oh, right, right, right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you've taught a lot of people how to make cheese. Do you find that there is a specific mindset that helps for for them to enjoy making cheese, for example?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I think just not overcomplicating it. I think that it's very easy to go into it, and one, you don't know anything, and then there's all these new things that you're learning. And so as you learn, it's really easy to become overwhelmed. So what I recommend people do is don't research too much before you dive in. Just order your ingredients, basically, pick one recipe and make that recipe, and then make it over and over and over again until it feels comfortable before you start branching out and trying to do too many different things. I think that is sort of the best mindset to get in, because it is so easy to overwhelm yourself. And cheese making isn't just especially aged cheese making is not just the making part, it's also the aging part. And so, sure, you learn how to make this cheese, but then now you have to learn how to age it. And so it just helps so much if you just do one cheese and get really, really good at making it, and then add in more cheeses after that.
What do you think the learning curve is? Like, if someone's brand new to it, are we talking a month? Are we talking 6 months to actually start to feel like not a master, but like that, okay, I got this.
I feel like it depends what type of cheese you're trying to make. And I feel like if you're just gonna, I recommend that you just start with some simple dairy processing. Start with making like yogurt, and you can become a master of yogurt in like 2, 3 batches. You might even feel like you're a master of making yogurt after the first batch, because it really is just that easy. And so that's going to just give you some confidence to sort of go from there. And then if you just sort of pick one cheese, plug away at it, get good at it, you're going to kind of become a master of each cheese as you go along. And that's going to it's kind of going to propel your learning a lot quicker than trying to bounce around all sorts of different cheeses.
What's a good first cheese for someone to start? We mentioned yogurt for that, yogurt or kefir, but what's a good first cheese?
Anything like a cream cheese or anything like that is a really so you I kind of recommend, this is the roadmap. So make some yogurt, then make some cream cheese, and then maybe like some fresh cottage cheese or something like that. And then a really good sort of aged cheese to start with is feta, especially because you don't really need a lot of fancy equipment. You probably have everything in your kitchen that you already need to make feta. You just have to order a few of the ingredients. But so that's a first good aged cheese to make, would be feta.
Now, you obviously focus on cow, but how does species affect? the cheese, or have you experienced other? I'm sure you've worked with goat as well, right?
Yeah, goat. I haven't done much of it, but I teach a lot of goat milk cheesemakers and also sheep milk cheesemakers. So sheep's milk, I wish I had a sheep. Sheep's milk is like it's amazing. It makes such good cheese. But anyways, so both are all ruminant species of animals can their milk can be turned into cheese, and you can make all of the same cheeses that I make with cow's milk, with goat's milk, or with sheep's milk. It's going to be basically the same process. The taste is going to be a little bit different. You can't take the goat out of the goat milk, and you can't take the sheep out of the sheep's milk. But those kind of nuances, they're fine. They I would say add to the cheese.
Have you ever worked with camel?
I've never worked with camel, but that would be cool. I think
I
if
I
I had like to have a wish list for species, it'd be like camel, yak, donkey. I want to try and making cheese with all those ones.
rat. Have you ever worked with rats? No.
I don't
Rat
think I don't
cheese.
know I don't have any desire to make rat milk.
Yeah,
Rat
that
to
would
milk
be
a rat.
awkward. It's funny I asked about the camel though because I was in some Amish country and in Pennsylvania, and I learned that they're at least in that area near Gap, Pennsylvania, they have a camel farm, and it was really interesting. I was talking to a functional doctor who was dealing with a patient whose child was having lots of issues, and he recommended that they try camel milk,
Yeah,
and they did, and the child's issues completely went away.
that's amazing.
Um, so I was like, wow, so there's some power in camel milk. What's that all about? But I didn't get much further than that. But it sounds like it's new to you as well.
Yeah, it is, the only experience I kinda or not experience, but, not or I wouldn't even say knowledge. The only observation I had of someone using camel milk was, there's this guy, named Trevor. His account is the Milk Trekker on Instagram. He goes all over, he goes all over the world looking for traditional cheese making, and so he was, somewheres and he was basically on they were, um they were moving camels from some place and, yeah, had all this camel milk and stuff, and they had these little udder covers to cut so that they could calf share with the camels. It was pretty cool.
Now, what role do you think cheese making plays in building resilience in our homesteading communities, or just in general? When you are supporting people and learning it, what do you find, particularly in today's world where resilience is maybe potentially a lost art, but it's also so important for us to be moving more towards because we need more of it, right?
Yeah. I think it's so important that we learn at least a little bit of the skill of cheese making on our homesteads or in our communities because we don't want it to become a lost art. We want to, preserve all of these traditions that are a lot of them have been lost already, and so we don't want to lose the ones that we're finding. So that's really important. And it's also really important to know how to preserve your milk. Like, milk was never meant to be refrigerated. Refrigeration is brand new in cheese making if you're looking at in terms of the thousands of years that cheese has been made. So we don't want to lose the skill of being able to preserve our milk and save it for seasons when we don't have milk because there is seasonality to milk and to cheese making that we just don't recognize these days because you can always go to the grocery store and you can always get milk. And so that's important to kind of recognize as well.
Hmm. Now, if I'm just curious, like, because I think this is a concern. I mean, I deal a lot with organ meats and supporting people needing whole animal. I mean, cheese making, as you mentioned, is a lost art. I mean, in many ways, and so there's a real effort, and clearly you're leading. One of the leaders of this effort to support people in maintaining traditional cheese making skills to help spread the knowledge of that. Is there, if we were to see cheese making disappear as a skill, but you had to preserve, one part of that process for future generations, what do you think that would be and why?
So I think that we would never see cheese making completely disappear because milk wants to be turned to cheese. If you milk milk out of a cow and you let it sit out, it's going to clabber. It's going to turn into cheese. And so I think that um, kind of that knowledge that if we lean into natural cheese making, we lean into the natural properties of milk, that would be what I would want to preserve. The idea that, okay, we've lost everything, but if we lean into what milk actually wants to do, we could learn in. If we could learn what we need to know. Like we could, yeah, it would reteach us if we really leaned into the natural properties of milk.
I love that. I love that thought. Like that it's almost like the milk, it has a desired outcome and we just have to listen to it. We
Yeah,
just have to
exactly.
be patient and listen to it and let it do its thing. That's really
Yeah.
cool. Well, it's been so lovely talking with you. Obviously, you provide educational programs. Anyone that's interested in learning more, particularly if you want to dive into the clabber, where would they find you, and where should they start?
Yeah, I have a website, so cheesefromscratch.com. Jump on my newsletter list. So I send out a newsletter every Monday. I've got a book coming out in spring 2025. It's being published through Homestead Living, so I'm very excited about that. So if you're on my newsletter list, you'll find out about that first. And then for like the kind of day to day things, I'm on Instagram, I'm on YouTube. So you can find all sorts of kind of inspiration and tutorials and stuff on both of those channels.
And your handle, and we'll put that in the show notes. But if you just want to verbally say it,
Yeah, it's at and then cheese underscore from underscore scratch underscore. So underscore
okay,
is added for each.
lots of underscores. What's the Milkmaid Society?
Yeah, so that's my monthly membership club. So it teaches all things cheese making and dairy processing and milk cows and dairy goats. And so it's information created by me, but also I've hired, I think I've got like 30 people have contributed content to the Milkmaid Society. So it was kind of like the goal of it was to become like this ultimate resource for people, milkmaids or milkmen who wanted to come on to here and just have everything in one spot. And so that's it's been going for 2.5 years now, and there's a ton of information on there.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, that's a good point, though. Do you find that cheese making skews more female or male?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so anymore. But I think that it maybe used to be sort of more of a male, or in the last 100 years, it was sort of more of a male dominated area. But I think as more people are learning how to make cheese on their homesteads, it's for everyone.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, thank you again. And we'll put all the links in the show notes. And I hope that this episode has inspired people to start making, whether it's yogurt or kefir, making something from scratch. Because I really do believe that controlling our ingredients is the way to go. And as you mentioned, it's what you find in the store, whether it's ultra processed, ultra pasteurized, has more than four ingredients. There's lots of things that you just have to be aware of, and I love that you're really teaching people to kind of take that power back and just do it themselves. Um, Thank you again. I'm looking forward to hopefully converting lots of people to starting to make their own cheese. Um, Before we go though, where would people, like? Let's just say if they do want to make kefir, are you teaching them how to make it themselves without outside source, or where do you usually recommend people purchase the freeze dried cultures if they are using anything?
So any cheese supply website, so in the United States, the best one probably is cheesemaking.com. It's New England cheesemaking company. And if you're in Canada, probably the best one would be Glengarry Cheesemaking. It's out of Ontario. You can also order from there if you're in the States too. So those are good places to sort of start and get your ingredients. As far as kefir, it's nice if you can find somebody in your area that is already making it. And so kefir is very cool. It's the grains, the grains are all probably derived from one grain that was um, made like thousands and thousands of years ago. So if you can find somebody in your area that has kefir grains kind of going, then you can take some of their kefir grains and start your own. So that's kind of the cool thing about it.
And lastly, where do you recommend people get raw, or how should someone try to source raw milk if they are interested in going that direction?
So it definitely depends where you are located. If you're in the States, there is a cool map. It's on a website called realmilk.com. So you can go onto that map and it kind of links you with people that are selling raw milk. If you're in Canada, we don't have that map, and it is quite illegal to buy raw milk, but just ask around. There's Facebook pages for almost every province to help farmers sort of discreetly link with consumers. Ask around in your communities, ask around at your farmers markets. In a lot of parts of the world, or in a lot of parts of North America, raw milk is illegal, so you do have to be discreet about it. But you probably will be able to find it if you dig hard enough.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. And thank you all for listening or watching this episode of Everyday Ancestral. Make sure to follow us, make sure to subscribe, make sure to share. This is the way we get the word out, and please stay curious. Thank you again, Robyn. Thank you so much for joining me on Everyday Ancestral. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. You can find the show notes, links, and resources mentioned at eatpluck.com. That's EATPLUCK.com. And hey, if you know someone who'd get something out of this, share it with them too. Stay curious, live well, and keep it ancestral.